Hello, everyone. Welcome to WaterNow Alliance's next installment of our Water Webinar Wednesdays series. Today, we'll be talking about the Sewer Overflow and Stormwater Reuse Municipal Grant Program. I'm Caroline Cook, the Policy Director at WaterNow, and we are delighted that y'all have joined us today. So before we get started, let's quickly review some of the functionality of the Zoom, which may be familiar to you all, but just a refresher. On the left is a general chat icon where you can ask questions related to any technical challenges. My colleague Jessie will be able to help you with that, but do keep in mind that everyone can see those messages. You'll also be able to submit your content-related questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A tools that you can see. So our panel may respond to your question in writing in that Q&A box, so do keep an eye out for that. But we'll also be having questions at the end. You can also turn on closed captioning by clicking the Show Captions button at the bottom of your screen. And we will be providing a recording of today's webinar through our Tap into Resilience resource library. So we'll follow up with that. So for today's panel, we've got a great set of speakers. We have Michael Goralczyk from EPA's Office of Wastewater Management and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, Corrine Johnson, who is Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources Non-Point Source Program Manager, and Jessie Bennett, the Southeast Wisconsin Non-Point Source Runoff Coordinator with WDNR. We're very glad to have you all with us today. So let's take a quick look at our agenda. First, I'll very briefly introduce WaterNow. Then we'll turn it over to Michael to walk through the OSG program background. We'll then pause to ask you all some poll questions about your local water challenges and familiarity with these grants. And then Michael will pick it back up to zero in on some eligibilities and priorities of the program. From there, we'll hear from Corrine and Jessie about some of the details on how Wisconsin is implementing their OSG program and to highlight a few early example projects that these grants are supporting. And as I mentioned, we'll have time at the end for questions. So one last housekeeping item here. We would love to hear your feedback about today's program, so be sure to fill out our survey at the close of the webinar, and we'll put the link in the chat to make it super easy for you. So for those viewers who aren't familiar with our organization, WaterNow is a nonprofit network of local water decision makers advancing sustainable, affordable, equitable, and climate resilient water solutions across the One Water spectrum. So sustainable is a term that has many meanings. For WaterNow, I'll note that it means providing safe, healthy, and affordable water services for people while preserving the integrity of water resources and the environment for future generations. And equity is also a term that can mean different things for different groups. For WaterNow, it means universal access to secure, affordable, safe, and healthy drinking water and wastewater and stormwater management services. And where equitable water infrastructure investment are those investments that support the long-term sustainability of our waterways, water systems, and utilities. So with that introduction, I'll hand it over to Michael.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and welcome to our presentation for today. So again, my name is Michael Goralczyk. I'm with the EPA's Office of Wastewater Management, and I help run the Sewer Overflow and Stormwater Reuse Municipal Grant Program at EPA headquarters in Washington, D.C. And because that whole title is a mouthful, we shortened it to OSG to make it semi-bearable to talk in conversations. All right, and with that, I believe I have control. So, oh, there we go. All right, so a little background for the program, and bear with me all. This is the background section of the presentation, and our friends at Wisconsin will have the more exciting part of the presentation. So just bear with me. I promise you it gets better. So OSG has been around, I believe, since the early 2000s, but we haven't received funding for the program since until 2020. So what happened was the America's Water Infrastructure Act, AWIA, in 2018 reauthorized a bill, the act, to make it relevant again, and then 2 years later brought funding for the program. And indeed, we started this program for overflow and stormwater projects. Now, again, in 2021, EJA, Investment Infrastructure Jobs Act, or known as Bill, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, amended the program to make it more amendable for small communities, which we call 10,000 or less, or financially distressed communities as defined by the state. So this put more emphasis on supporting those communities, which I'll talk about more later. The way this program works is it's a grant program, and there's an allotment formula based with this program according to the law, meaning if Congress appropriates money for the program to operate, we have a formula that cuts up the money in 56 ways. So every state, District of Columbia, and the territories can all get a percentage of those funds based off their stormwater needs, their population, and their annual rainfall. And every year, those numbers are updated to ensure the data we have available is giving equitable percentages to those populations. And the structure of the way the grant works is Congress appropriates money to the program, and then EPA then takes that and then has that money available for states to come in to access their percentage or their allotment portion. And when a state takes on that grant, that seed grant, then they have those funds to fund municipal projects. So every state operates differently in how they are soliciting projects and making those funds available for projects. But once a state has their seed money in the program, then they're able to give sub-grants to an eligible municipality for the work that they have chosen. So moving on, I believe we have a poll for you all to make sure you're not buried in your email.
Yes, thank you, Michael. And I think Jesse is going to launch our first poll here. We are curious about two things. First, how familiar are you all with this OSG program? Thank goodness the name got shortened. Not that I'm a fan of too many more acronyms, but I appreciate it on this one. And then we're curious on what size municipality you all are from, given those population priorities for this program. So we'll give everyone a moment to fill out these polls. How familiar are you with the OSG program? You've already received funding. You're working on a grant application. You've heard of it, but you're not too sure about what this is all about. And that this is the first time you're hearing about it. And then let us know your community population. And Jesse, when it's looking like we've got some good responses on that poll, we can close it out maybe in the next few moments and share the results. Excellent. So it looks like we've got quite a few people, 66% of the group. This is the first time they're hearing about the program, so we're glad y'all are here. This is why we're doing these programs and webinars. And most folks look like there's a big chunk in the 10,000 to 100,000 range, and we've got some smaller communities as well on with us today. So we appreciate your letting us know, and we can get to know a little bit more about everyone that's on today's program. It's really helpful for us. Thanks for participating in that. And I'll hand it back over to you, Michael.
Great. Well, that's encouraging to see that this is news to a lot of folks, and thank you for joining to learn more. So bear with me. All right, so we can continue with the background of it. But again, that's great that a lot of you have come to learn about this program. Um, so there is, like any new program that gets built, there's a little bit of a lag for the time it takes to get stood up, sent out, implemented by the states, and understood by the general public to ask for these funds. Which is good because there is a lot of funds available that haven't been taken yet, meaning we're waiting for projects to come in or states to take on their grant from EPA to start some of this work. So I think the best way that that happens when there's interest on the ground level. So it's encouraging to see everyone here today. Now, what can this money be funded for? So according to the law, this money is for projects at the municipal level to treat combined sewer overflows, sanitary sewer overflows, or stormwater. Now, it's a pretty wide range of projects, and basically the money is to manage, reduce, treat, or recapture stormwater and subsurface drainage water. So basically, if there's water flowing over the landscape, how can we manage it in a way that best leads to public health, environmental quality? That's what this program's intended for. Now, so this project is able to plan, or these funds are able to plan, design, or construct these projects. So if you're a community that knows you have a stormwater problem, but may not know how to address it, or you need funds to help get you there, this is a perfect way to get that started, meaning that these funds can plan and design this work. So then there's something in the docket for you all to come to use later for your municipal um, at the municipal level for your funding accounts, or if you want to come in for further financing from EPA, this is the perfect way to get you in that line. So OSG is pretty flexible. The law was written that way. It can fund a lot of different projects. So stormwater can mean many different things, and depending on you are, it's treated very differently. Phoenix, Arizona treats stormwater quite differently than Boston, Massachusetts. So whatever your state's need is, there's a way that this money can be addressed to that. So like I said earlier, the bill law changed the program to focus on disadvantaged communities and small communities, which allows those constituents opportunities to access federal financing in maybe times where it was harder for them in the past. And if any of you are familiar with the EPA's Clean Water State Revolving Fund that each state has access to, this money is designed to pair well with those funds, since traditionally that's where EPA's stormwater and CSO projects were funded out of, and still are. This is just a supplementary additional program that stays as a grant. So moving forward, what do these projects fund? Basically, if there's wet weather events that needs control, chances are this money can fund projects to treat that. So that's anywhere from separating sanitary and storm sewers, for disconnecting your downspouts that are running into the street, installing an overflow tank or CSO tunnels in your community, a lot of I&I work or correcting leaks that are in your pipes underground. If you have to add new sewer pipes or new conveyance movement systems to move stormwater to a healthier place, that's a possible. Street sweepers and vacuum trucks to help clean streets and clean out storm interceptors. I think the most broad category is green infrastructure. That can mean many different things. So bioswales, rain gardens, rain barrels, a whole slew of elements that can capture or suspend stormwater and treat it instead of just pushing it through a pipe down to the treatment center. Constructed wetlands is a great way to use natural ecosystems to absorb and treat stormwater. And then also, if a community wants to establish or restore their urban tree canopy, that's another great way to use green infrastructure to absorb a lot of these runoffs. All right, moving forward. We may have another poll coming up soon. Okay.
Yes, I'm here to interrupt you again, Michael, with our next poll for the group, which we'll do as a word cloud exercise this time around. So if you have a moment to scan that QR code that you can see on your screen, or you can type in the link into your browser, menti.com, with that number code 1979-6844. That will take you to our word cloud page. And once you're there, you can type in as many responses as you'd like to let us know the most significant sewer overflow or stormwater challenges that your community is facing. Great, it looks like we're getting some responses in, lots of flooding and funding. Excellent, I'm really glad that this is working. You never know on the technology. Thanks everyone. Funding seems to be winning out here. Flooding is catching up again. Aging infrastructure right up there as well. Lots of answers. We appreciate this. All right. Funding and flooding and aging infrastructure are remaining our top choices. Maintenance getting in there. All right. All right. Any more? Get your last responses in here. Funding is not losing its #1 spot. So this is really helpful for us. Flooding remaining a top concern. Maintenance, I see, growing. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. This is really helpful for us to understand going forward, and also helps reinforce that these funding focused webinars are a good place for us to be. We have one more poll for us. We are curious, does your municipality use green infrastructure to help manage stormwater? And I think Jesse is going to pop that up. Thanks so much, Jesse. Yes, you're using green infrastructure. You are somewhat, you're not quite sure. And no, this is not part of your stormwater management solutions yet. And then if you are using green infrastructure, or maybe if you're not, then it's not important. But how important are these strategies to addressing your sewer overflow and stormwater management challenges? So thanks for taking a moment to fill those two out. And Jesse, when it's looking good and we've got most folks responding, thanks for sharing the results there. All right. 40% saying they already use green infrastructure. That's encouraging. We like to see that. Thank you for sharing on that front. And then that these are pretty important strategies for you all. So again, thanks for sharing that. This is a really good feedback. And we hope that you will see the OSG program as a path forward to closing some of those funding gaps for green infrastructure. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Michael. Thank you again, everyone, to dig into some final details.
Great. Well, thank you. I bet everyone can agree that watching that word cloud populate is what we all feel like watching our inbox come in sometimes, of just, this is how your brain's trying to function. All right. So I mentioned earlier the CWSRF, or the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. So this has been the way that EPA has been funding wastewater projects for the last 35 years. And OSG is a way to complement those projects. So they are indeed, so that's where I work. I work for the CWSRF and EPA. These programs are separate though. OSG is not part of the CWSRF. It's just written to be a little sister of the program and to stay as a grant program, because the CWSRF is a loan program. Now, why that's important is if any of you all have or plan on taking CWSRF funds to fund your wastewater infrastructure projects, half of your requirements or all of them are pretty much already completed. So taking on OSG funds is just that much more streamlined for you, which can be very helpful for continuing projects. Also, some projects, when they get put up, they need various years of funding since they're so large. So OSG is designed to co-fund or work well with other federal funds. All right, so Congress gave us the priorities that the OSG program needs to prioritize applicants that are financially distressed or considered disadvantaged, and that's defined by the state. EPA doesn't define that. Or it's a community that's implementing a CSO or SSO long-term control plan, meaning they have overflows that are damaging their community and they have an EPA plan on how to address those over a 9-step program. Or you have a project on your state's CWSRF intended use plan list, meaning you're in line for loan funding already to get the funds. So a state can use your application on that list to then prioritize you to give you grant funds. Or if you're in Alaska, if you are an Alaska Native village. So those are the priorities or the front door your community would need to go through to first be considered for these funds by your state. Also, there are some minimum requirements that each state has to follow in using their money. 20% of each grant has to be considered a green project reserve, meaning that project has to either facilitate energy efficiency, water conservation, green infrastructure, or an environmentally advanced or innovative technology. So almost all stormwater projects are going to fall under one of those. So that's a pretty easy target to hit. And then as of the new bill from 2021, a quarter of each state has to give these funds to a community that's 10,000 or less, or have a population 10,000 or less, or is considered a financially distressed community. So this is what I was saying earlier, to ensure these communities in need have access to these funds, since these are grant funds. And another thing to consider is these projects have a 4-year window of when the money needs to be spent. So the projects should be at least phased that they are ready to go within that time period. Okay, now part of every federal grant, the majority of federal grants that you will encounter has something called cost share, meaning that the recipient has some skin in the game, that they have to also put up some funds to ensure the project is meeting the requirements and that they are investing in that project as well. So for OSG, the federal share is 80% of the project, and then the non-federal share or the state share is 20%. So what that means is if your project costs $100,000, 80,000 of that will come from your OSG grant, and 20% will come from other funds from your state, which cannot be federal sources. So those sources can be state appropriations, so state tax dollars, private sources from the community or businesses, in-kind services, which is ways that community is contributing existing capital resources to that. You know, you equate that to a dollar amount and contribute that amount, so such as land or hours of work. Or you can use an SRF loan if it's considered the state portion of the loan. So it can't be a federal CWSRF loan. It has to be a recycled or a reflow loan. I can answer more questions on that later if people are interested in that. So one of the exciting things with the new bill that came out, the new law that came out in 2021, is Congress said that states cannot require small communities, which they call rural, or disadvantaged communities from receiving a burden from the cost share. So what EPA did in response is EPA will reduce the cost share amount when a community is considered either one of those two, 10,000 population or less, or disadvantage. So if you are a community that falls under one of those two parameters, your state does not have to contribute cost share, which is a big deal because that can make this a true grant of 100% funding, which is pretty rare. So that's, in all intensive purposes, free money to support those communities. So that's a pretty big deal, we think. All right, how much money are we talking about? This means a lot in this category. So in total, there's over $161 million in the fund to grant out to communities for their projects. And those are the breakdowns per federal fiscal year that they've been awarded. So as you see, the first appropriation in 2020 was 28 million. And this past fiscal year, it's been 50 million. So money's increasing. Congress is seeing that this is a serious issue and states need support here. So they're continuing to fund the program. And we anticipate to receive continued appropriations as years go on, contingent on a congressional budget being in the works and funding the federal government. Now, some of you might see, oh, that's a lot of money, $161 million. But remind you, that's allocated over 56 state entities, the states, DC, and the territories. So some CSO projects can cost $1 billion themselves, right? So once this money gets cut up 56 ways, that doesn't leave enormous pots of money for huge capital projects, which lends to be more of a attractive funding source for green infrastructure and other stormwater projects that are less capital intensive, but still has a strong benefit. All right, so this is my last slide, so bear with me all. So who to contact? If you're on this webinar, you're interested in this fund, so what does that mean to you? So municipalities are the only entity that can spend this money. So you either have to be a municipality who's in charge of managing your wastewater or your stormwater, or you can be an NGO or side group or nonprofit that's supporting your municipality. So your municipality has to take the money, but you can still be working with them and helping them drive their management ways to impact their stormwater issues. So the way it works, if you're interested, is you have to contact your state office that handles their wastewater investment financing. Usually it's going to be their State Revolving Fund office, but that's not true for every state. And getting in contact to ask them how they are using their OSG funds and what their solicitation process is for accepting project applications. Each state's different, and now we're going to turn it off to Wisconsin so they can talk about some of the projects they've done with the funds. So I'll turn it over now. Nope, I lied. Those are just resources that will be available later on that you can access to see more information and read how the program is being implemented on EPA's website. Or you can just Google EPA OSG and you can find it there as well. With that, now I'll turn it over to Wisconsin and they can tell you about the interesting work they're doing.
All right, great. Thank you, Michael. Again, my name is Corrine Johnson, and I am Wisconsin DNR's Non-Point Source Program Grant Manager. I manage 3 grant programs in our state that deal with non-point source pollution and runoff management work in general, including permitted MS4 work in terms of funding practices and planning and that sort of thing. And so I'm going to get to our slide here. So I want to talk a little bit about how Wisconsin went about developing its OSG funding approach. I want to thank EPA for early on, back in 2021, for their outreach to states when the first implementation document came out for OSG. And EPA provided a webinar providing an overview of OSG. And those of us in Wisconsin's grant programs, runoff management grant programs, and our stormwater program kind of honed in on the fact that the word stormwater is in the title of the program. And our ears perked up when we got a better understanding of what the program was going to fund. And especially so when we saw that our state allocations for 2020 and 2021 were going to be to the tune of about $1.2 million combined. And so, like I said, those of us working in runoff management, grants, stormwater, our ears perked up, and we didn't want to pass up the opportunity to apply for this funding. And at the same time, our Clean Water Fund loan program, our SRF program staff, we're also thinking the same thing, that we shouldn't, as a state, pass up the opportunity to apply for this funding. And since so much of our SRF program, our Clean Water Fund program, does focus on traditional wastewater type projects, both from our grant side and our loan side, we agreed that this might be an opportunity to focus this particular flavor of money on stormwater type projects. And after looking at the implementation guidance for the program, after attending the webinar, working as a team internally, we agreed that this is probably going to be a good fit with some of our existing programs within our state, and that it probably wouldn't take much, and we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel to bring this OSG money into existing stormwater efforts in the state of Wisconsin. So, in the original implementation guidance, Michael already touched on this, that one of the opportunities for using this funding was, again, to manage, reduce, treat, and recapture stormwater or subsurface drainage water. And we were very much honed in on that in the list of things that were eligible at the time. And I will say that this list of sideboards that I put together is an oversimplification based on what Michael provided. He provided a much more thorough list of the OSG sideboards. But when we started thinking about the money and the requirements, we started to see some similarities again to some of our existing programs here in the state of Wisconsin. We're fortunate to have, like I said, 3 state grant programs, some of which are focused more so on agricultural non-point source pollution control, but we also do have one that is focused specifically on urban non-point source and stormwater management. And so, again, we looked at the requirements, focused on green infrastructure. Our state is paying more attention to environmental justice, disadvantaged communities. So we really honed in on the words financially distressed communities and that requirement. And like the fact that the guidance for the OSG program was going to allow us to use some of the existing criteria. We weren't going to have to start from scratch in defining and looking at the definition for financially distressed communities. So given that we have an existing SRF program with that criteria, it was nice that, again, there we were not going to have to reinvent the wheel. Another really good thing that we honed in on was the fact that the OSG funding was going to allow us to use a portion of the funding for administrative expenses associated with actually implementing the grant funding. So that was appealing to us as a state as well. Now, Michael did touch on the fact that in some instances, a 20% match, non-federal match is required, but then in other instances, it's not. At the time when we started to kind of think about how we were going to structure our methodology for divvying up the funding and allocating the funding, again, we looked to our existing programs. And the one I want to talk about with everybody today is our Urban Non-Point Source and Stormwater Management Grant Program. Wisconsin is fortunate in that we have this existing grant program that is funded and on the construction grant side with state bond revenue. So thinking about that 20% match requirement, it wasn't a struggle for us to think about where we could get that money. We're very fortunate that we have this grant program that provides state bond revenue for construction grants, specifically focused on stormwater runoff management practices. The Urban Non-Point Source Grant Program in Wisconsin funds the more traditional urban stormwater runoff practices, but also we fund a whole host of green infrastructure practices as well. And so there too, it aligned well with the OSG requirements for putting a portion of the funding towards green infrastructure. Now, the Urban Non-Point Source Grant Program in Wisconsin has got a 50% cost share rate. It has a $150,000 grant cap. Now, many of you know that in the realm of stormwater management, that can be a drop in the bucket for certain practices in terms of total cost. But the idea of being able to pool the OSG money with the Urban Non-Point Source money was very much appealing. And being able to pool it to the point of potentially providing up to 100% cost sharing for those rural communities and or financially disadvantaged communities was also very appealing, and something that we would be able to do given that our state has the state bond revenue to partner up with the OSG funding. Similar to OSG, our Urban Non-Point Source Grant Program only provides grants to governmental units. Most of the grants that we provide are to permitted MS4s, permitted municipal stormwater permittees. So that there aligns too with OSG in that grants are going to municipalities. And Michael touched on the 4-year timeline for OSG funding. Our Urban Non-Point Source grants in Wisconsin are 2-year grants with the possibility of a 1-year extension in certain circumstances. But fitting 2-year stormwater construction grants in that 4-year timeline for OSG funding would work out well. And we thought that it would be a good fit. We have an established application scoring process and ranking process for our Urban Non-Point Source construction grants. And so that made it easy in that we weren't going to have to build a process or a system. We essentially went about implementing our application process for our calendar year 23 Urban Non-Point Source grants, and then held that list of projects up to the OSG criteria. And lo and behold, out of 26 grant applications that we received last year for grants starting this year, about 26 applications, 9 of them were projects that included green infrastructure practices and also happened to be in either rural communities or in financially distressed or disadvantaged communities. And so we were very fortunate that we kind of knew this and hoped this going in, but the proof was actually in the rank list that we were able to really align the 2 program goals very well together. And so, you know, again, visiting what Michael mentioned, you know, this tie with the SRF funds or with the SRF program, we started to put together our work plan for the OSG funding and our grant application. And we essentially told the story of how we came to our funding decisions and our allocations using the Urban Non-Point Source grant process. And we, again, not reinventing the wheel, we looked to our Clean Water Fund program's intended use plan affordability criteria for defining that the financially distressed communities. We did not create new criteria for OSG, and we're thankful that the grant requirements do give us that ability to use the intended use plan affordability criteria for that purpose. And so both the intended use plan for FFY 23 includes our OSG allocation and methodology, and also then obviously the work plan and the grant application to EPA incorporated our allocation plan and methodology, and resulting was we were able to fund, we went down our rank list to find the top ranked projects that met not just the urban non-point source grant criteria, but also the OSG grant criteria. And we were able to co-fund 3 urban non-point source projects to the tune of 100% of the estimated cost for those projects. We met those OSG requirements for funding green infrastructure, for funding rural communities and or the financially distressed communities. And again, all of those projects started at the beginning of calendar year 23. And so we took our almost over $1.2 million OSG allocation, that again, that 2020 and 21 funding, and put over 1.1 million of it towards those urban non-point source projects. And about 49,000 of it went for administration of the funding. And then with that, we provided 20% non-federal match, about $307,000 of state bond revenue to match those projects. But as Michael said, program requirements kind of change over the course of our timeline. We ultimately ended up funding all of our projects in financially distressed communities. And so with the change in the bill, we actually didn't necessarily need to provide that match, but in the end we did. We were fortunate that we were able to put that state funding towards those projects. And so going forward, next on the docket will be pretty much doing the same thing in Wisconsin. For our 22 and 23 OSG allocations, we're planning on, again, tying them to our urban non-point source construction grants. Our grant applications will be going out for the 25 grant awards. They'll be going out April 15th of 24. We'll do the same thing in that we're going to, use our ranking and scoring process, holding up the OSG requirements to the urban non-point source requirements, and finding the projects that meet the needs of both and the goals of both programs. We'll put together our OSG work plan and grant application, update the intended use plan as necessary, and then ideally be awarding those co-funded projects, those urban non-point source projects, starting January 1st, 2025. So, again, for those of you whose states have not applied, those of you in municipalities where you're wondering if your states have applied, I encourage you to get in touch with your clean water, your SRF loan program staff, or your runoff management or non-point source program staff in your water quality agencies, and check in on the status of things, because in many cases we were very fortunate, at least in Wisconsin, to pool our programs and not really have to start from scratch in getting the OSG funding out the door. So we were very lucky in that regard. So Jesse's I'm gonna turn the control over to Jesse, and he's gonna highlight some of the projects of the 3 that we funded. He's gonna highlight some of the project goals, and you can get a sense of where the funding went.
Yep. All right. Thanks, excuse me. Thanks, Corrine. Yeah, my name's Jesse Bennett, and I'm the non-point source coordinator for Southeastern Wisconsin. So one of my main responsibilities is managing those urban non-point source construction grants that Corrine was talking about. Just so happens that the 3 grants that ranked highest and met those criteria were all in my region. So Corrine called me up and said, hey, got some new funding here, but as a regulator, it's always nice to give good news to people and let them know that these projects are going to be able to be 100% funded. So 2 of the projects were with the same grantee, the Milwaukee Public School District, part of their Greener, Healthier Schoolyard initiative. And these grants here, as you can see, one was for about $500,000, the one was for $470,000. So those numbers include the OSG funding as well as the our normal stormwater grant state bond funding as well. And both those projects were for include costs for engineering design, putting in things like bioretention, bioswales, permeable pavement, and those are both those schoolyards fall within the city of Milwaukee's permitted MS4 area. Then the other grant was for the Slinger Speedway, which is in the village of Slinger, which is more to the northwest of my area, more rural, smaller community. And that grant included engineering as well, bioretention, swales, and some catch basins as well. So I'll just try to give a brief overview of these projects. As Corinne stated, these grants just were awarded at the end of January, 2-year grants. So we haven't really broken ground on any of these, but they are working on things like engineering design. This is the Slinger grant. I'm expecting to have the plant's inspecting this one any day now, actually. But this is the site where the proposed work is going on. So this is in the village of Slinger, the Slinger Speedway, they call it. The existing site here has no stormwater controls. There's a single inlet on this speedway area that discharges to a small 10-inch pipe that then goes directly into the village's stormwater sewer system. So under these current conditions, you have lots of flow coming from this area as well as the track, and it's picking up things like salt and grease and oil. Imagine this is a racetrack, so there's lots of pollutants here that are getting picked up and then all getting discharged directly into the stormwater sewer system without any sort of treatment. So this project proposes a number of treatments as well as some better conveyance to prevent flooding and ponding of water at this site. So this is the existing site, or the existing discharge point. You can't even really see it. There's about a 10-inch pipe here where all that water is coming through, and then going directly down this grassed swale into the village's MS4, into their stormwater sewer system. So here are some of the proposed improvements at the site. We were able to get this from their application materials. So they've kind of broken the project into 2 drainage areas. This first drainage area here, the infield area and the track, is going to involve improvements to regrading and improving this kind of infield area, and then putting in multiple catch basins with sumps to help collect some of that runoff, as well as putting in a proprietary separation device. It's going to be targeting TSS and oil removal. And then they're also going to be putting in a appropriately sized conveyance pipe to then convey that to this area here, which the village is entering easement with to control this area. But that pipe will then discharge, instead of going directly into their and stormwater sewer system, it will go into first a vegetated swale and then a bioretention basin here. And then the other part of the project is this, what they're calling drainage area B. And the idea behind this project, or this area, is to keep all of that runoff from sheet flowing over this track and capturing it here with catch basins, an extensive vegetated swale around this area, and stormwater conveyance pipes to also then discharge to this vegetated swale and then into the bioretention basin. So, hopefully this will, you have multiple treatments there before it enters the pipes and at the end of pipe before it enters the village's MS4 area. So both the village and the Speedway have a mutual interest in putting in these improvements, not only for water quality, but this will also prevent ponding and flooding of this road here, as well as the Speedway. The other 2 projects are both with the Milwaukee Public School District. They're both part of a greener, healthier schoolyard initiative that they have, which the vision of this project is to target schoolyards to convert that impervious surface into green infrastructure to improve water quality, as well as educate the next generation of students there about the values of natural habitat in an urban environment. So these are the 2 sites. You can see just basically huge parking lots. So some of the issues here are that this water on these sites it's essentially just sheet flows over these large impervious areas, and is usually collected in a single, stormwater inlet, which sometimes can't handle the flow. Here in Wisconsin, it can get, it can freeze and turn into ice during the winter. Dangerous for the students. These lots have to be plowed and salted. So there's opportunity for better stormwater management here, to divert that stormwater into bioswales and other areas. Also, removing most of that, or a good portion of that asphalt, and replacing it with green infrastructure, things like bioswales, stormwater trees, porous pavement. And then, so that's great for the water quality side. And there's also, other benefits as well. This gives us additional green spaces, outdoor classrooms for the students, places to do nature play, and educational signage. So I'll just go over these real quick. This is the existing site at Klug. And then here is the proposed benefits. So you can see they're proposing to capture 252,000 gallons of stormwater, looking at removing 58,000 square feet of pavement and replacing things with bioswales, stormwater trees, turf grass, that kind of thing. And then the other site is very similar, just big pavement. And here's their proposed improvements at that site. Similar thing, they're proposing to capture 264,000 gallons, removing 66,000 square feet of pavement, and then putting in things like green areas for classrooms, bioswales, stormwater trees. So overall, just improvements to these areas. And I would just end here, just so you can see this was not a project that was funded with OSG, but it was a previous stormwater urban construction grant through the same schoolyard program that we had in 2021. So this was the before, and then here is the after. So you can see those improvements, those green classrooms, bioswales, getting rid of all that pavement. Just a remarkable improvement, just for aesthetics as well as water quality. Yeah, so if you have any questions about the specific projects or how we use the funding, it's there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jesse and Corrine and Michael, for those excellent overviews of this program, and love to see those pictures, and can't wait to see how the other projects turn out. Jesse, we've got about 5 to 7 minutes for some questions. We've got a lot in the box, so I've summarized a few, and we will try to follow up with you all as well to get your more specific questions answered after the webinar. And as a reminder, we will be sharing the slides and our recording following today's program. So stay tuned for that as well. But getting to some of the questions, I think this will probably be for Michael and the Wisconsin team as well. If you all could clarify what you mean by municipalities are the eligible entity, that can mean different things. So does that definition cover a broad scope of entities? Tell us a little bit more about that.
I can handle that one. So municipality is defined in the Clean Water Act, and for here it means the public entity responsible having the authority to treat water quality. So if that's your utility, that's typically the municipal entity that can take the funds. A lot of these funds will go to utilities since they are quasi-government or quasi-connected with the municipality. So it doesn't have to necessarily be your city's mayor's office. It can be your big utility or water treatment facilitator.
Gotcha. Corrine, Jesse, anything to add to that?
Yeah, and I'll just say that, in terms of urban non-point source grants, it is defined in our administrative code what is a governmental unit, and that essentially specifies, our code specifies that we can only give grants to governmental units. So in the case of our urban non-point source grants, more often than not, it is cities, towns, and villages that are also permitted MS4s. So they have stormwater permits, and they need to meet their permit requirements. And so again, it's usually cities, towns, villages, sometimes counties as well.
Great. Yeah. So it's sounding like the key items there to keep an eye out for are the public agency responsible for wastewater and stormwater management, which
Yep.
often takes the form of these municipalities, but can be broader. Excellent. Thanks for clarifying that. And then another, we talked about this a little bit, but maybe to reiterate how the definition of disadvantaged communities get set for this program, because I think I heard it varies, but maybe if y'all can clarify on that as well.
I'd like to start that off. Congress made that clear in our law that that's to be determined by each state. So that means we have 56 different definitions. So it's totally up to the state. We give that authority to them.
And we were grateful for that, at least from the standpoint that, you know, we had some flexibility there. But, you know, like I said, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. And since we already had some financial criteria in our intended use plan, we essentially use those criteria to help us determine those financially distressed, what was the threshold for those financially distressed communities.
Gotcha. Yeah. So check with your states, everyone, on how that's getting defined. Another question that came up for a few people, I think we might have time for one or two more, but I think this was top of mind. If there are maximum amounts that each individual grant can receive for a project, to provide any more details about that, or if there are minimums, and if you have any thoughts around a typical grant award, which you may not know yet, but at least are there maximum and minimums for these grants?
I can go ahead and get started. So I have the classic federal answer that I could probably answer all of these. It depends, state driven. Depends what state you're in. If you're in New York or Texas, we're talking about $6 million projects. If we're in Guam, it's 300,000. So it all depends on how big your allocation was, and it all depends on what your state is deciding to do in breaking up that money. Some states are deciding to give all of their lump sums to a single project. Other states are distributing those project costs over a various set of projects, like Wisconsin.
Exactly. And, you know, at this point, if we were to have awarded those urban non-point source grants just as state grants, like I mentioned in my one slide, we had $150,000 cap. And that's just to try to spread our limited funding across as many projects as we can in our state. But with bringing in the OSG funding, and also having the requirement of making sure that there wasn't a financial burden on the financially distressed communities, we made a point of fully funding those projects, those 3 projects that Jesse highlighted, with a combination to the tune of 100%. And it just so happened that those projects were about about $500,000 projects, but we did not specify a maximum. Ultimately, like Michael said, the maximum was going to be our allocation amount from OSG, you know, which was about $1.2 million for the 2 fiscal year allocations.
Awesome. Well, thanks for clarifying all of those. And thanks to everyone for your excellent questions. I know we weren't able to get to all of those, and we'll try to follow up after today's webinar, but we are nearing the end of our hour. So I just want to share another thanks to our excellent panel. We really appreciate your sharing your experience and insights with us today. I also want to do a few more closeout items here. If you're not already, we want to invite our local utility and city leaders in the audience to join WaterNow. It's free, and membership provides access to additional resources and other benefits we can tell you about. And one last reminder to please fill out the survey. We want to know how we're doing with these webinars, and we're going to put that link in the chat, I believe. But with that, that is our time for today. Thank you all again, and we hope the information that we shared will be useful to you all in your work.
Thank you all.
Thank you.